The book is called Never Sit in the Lobby, and that's one of the main rules at the beginning in the sales area, which is when you get to a customer, don't sit down in the lobby and start getting on your phone, going over the shopping list with your wife, because your customer is going to walk out and, you're going to be in the middle of texting your wife and he's like, "Oh, are you Glenn?" And you're like, looking all spazzy, and it's just not a good look, right? And I'm all about not being not a good look, right? Everything is not a good look avoidance, in my opinion. So everything you do has to be structured around putting your best foot forward at all times, and every impression is a forever impression, and so they all have to be perfect.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're thrilled to have Glenn Poulos on the mic. He is an entrepreneur and sales strategist who has built and exited multiple businesses, now leading ProgUSA at the intersection of utility infrastructure and surging data center and AI power demand. He's also the award-winning author of Never Sit in the Lobby. Thanks for coming on, Glenn.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'd love to start with your origin story. What is your background?
Yeah, I'm only laughing because that's like 40 something years ago, right? So how far back do we go? Born in Canada, Canadian, grew up there. And my first job, I went to school for electronics, always a bit of a geek about electronics, and got a diploma in that. And got a job with the Canadian government at the weather service, appropriate given this week's weather around North America. But nonetheless, fixing electronic gizmos at weather stations.
What is the weather in North America right now? It's winter, so it's like winter storms. I'm in California, so I don't feel it.
Okay, yeah. Right. Yeah. And I'm in Orlando because my new business I bought in Orlando to get out of Canada. And so, but I have family at home that are very mad at me today. So 2 feet of snow up there, it's minus something or other. And of course, we got the Celsius Fahrenheit thing to worry about, but it's cold, right?
Cold,
it's got the F word. Freezing. It's got the F word in front of the cold. Yeah. And so you know that it's bad when you have to say that, right?
Especially when Canadians say the F word, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I work for the government. My boss came to me one day and he said, you're probably much better suited for something like sales than being a civil servant. So you get out, right? And so
get on that phone, get under the door and start doing it.
Yeah. So I got a job in sales in 1985. And I was selling electronic gizmos, we'll call them, instruments to the electronic industry in Canada. Yep. Yeah, basically testing equipment and systems to, whether it's aerospace, military, general electronics. It was a general electronics company. And I worked for them for a number of years, started accumulating stories and mentoring, guidelines from people that work there and stuff like that. That's where I came up with the genesis of the book we can talk about later. That's where the stories started accumulating. And, a number of years in, I realized that they had some technology branches that I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur like them. I wanted to own the business because I got paid nicely when I got orders, but they got paid too, right? And they got paid on every order, my order, the guy beside me's order, the other guy's order. And so I approached them and I said, hey, can I peel off a bit of technology, create a new company? You guys can own a bit, I'll own a bit, and we'll split and, and the whole be greater than the sum of the parts kind of thing, right? And they said, categorically, no, not going to do that. You're well suited in your job. You should just stick to your knitting and, don't upset the apple cart. And so I quit the next day and I started my first company. And one of the funny things is that I'd only been married 6 days at the time, and I had forgotten to tell the wife that I was quitting my job. So we got married the following Friday. I said, "Oh, honey, I quit."
By the way.
And of course, yeah, so that went over like a lead balloon. But nonetheless, I worked there for on that business for 15 years and sold to a public company. It was a very nice exit, well into the 8 figures, but there were 3 of us, so we kind of had to divide it up amongst 3 guys. But nonetheless, we still all did very well. Yeah. So again, we were selling, and and so the part of the sort of one of the jokes I always tell, right, is like, I broke off. They told me to stick to my knitting and whatever, and don't focus on this one thing. And, and not because it wouldn't go anywhere, but just like it wasn't a good idea. Right. And I mean, the idea that I was focusing on was to focus on the cellular industry, right. And not cell phones themselves, but helping those carriers build the network, test the network, right. And the industrial sort of side of cellular. And of course that never went anywhere, right. Like who needs a cell phone? right?
Yeah, what's the market for cell phones? I mean, like maybe a million cell phones, right?
Exactly.
Gordon Gekko doing deals on Wall Street.
And so of course, the business didn't quite well. We helped the Canadian carriers build the network. We didn't build the network. We sold them the equipment that went into the network, right? And so we sold the business, and it was a public company, a well-known name in Canada, public company. Most people had heard of them. They had stores in the malls selling cell phones, and they were branching out. And the CEO was a very kind of, famous guy in the wireless industry. And I thought everything was fine. So we ended up doing this deal. But lesson learned, we did the deal for mostly stock and very little cash, and like under 100K cash.
And you had a lockup,
millions. And so millions and millions of dollars in shares. So I became a multi-millionaire overnight, emphasis on the quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the lockup was I could only sell 1% quarter for 2 years or something like that. Because not only was I an insider and what have you, but also I had the most shares in the company, and I ended up having the most shares in the public entity because of the amount they'd given me. I was their largest shareholder. And so I was very highly restricted. And in the 18 months that followed, that public company went bankrupt and the shares went to zero. And so what ended up happening was I worked for 15 years, gave them a $30 million company, and they, of course, bankrupted the whole thing, and I ended up with nothing. 40-something years old, had to start over. And so, and I wasn't really able to spend any of it, so it was kind of a hollow millionaire status, but it felt good at the time. And then all of a sudden I had nothing, and I had to literally start over. So I had to go get a job or start another company. And so competitive.
Would you do differently in that situation?
So I would. So of course, the things you learn as you go, right? So the next deal would have to be all cash, right? or something thereabouts, right? And so that would be the first thing too, is that, when these big companies come along, you're sort of incentivized, not incentivized. You kind of think like the reverse due diligence doesn't sort of click in, right? Like they're doing like, all this deep dive due diligence on you and quality of earnings and like 19 covenants up the yin yang of like, you got to guarantee this and warranty that and blah, 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 et cetera, right? And it's like, okay, well, no, show me your money, right? Show me that you're a solvent, right? And that never occurred to me. Completely green in that world. I know you come from the acquisition venture side of things, so this stuff's second nature for you. I was just a guy who built a business and it was doing well. We were making good money, and
here's a good offer.
Yeah. And I mean, I knew the people in this business. I knew their, I see their stores in the mall. I thought, hey, I was fine. And, I was becoming a millionaire. And so I thought it was all good. Right. But I should have done way more due diligence. That's the answer to your question.
What I would probably advise you to do is run a process and get an investment banker that represents you as a seller. Yeah.
So this thing came very quickly, and we had a little bit of an advisor, but we didn't really even have a broker, right? There wasn't even like a 5% guy that, the second time we had a broker under contract who was shopping us for several years. Right. And he earned his 5%. He earned his 5%. Time, and
there you go.
And then some. And he also probably he also was free, because he probably got us a lot more than we ever would have gotten with all of his techniques that he teaches you how to,
it's like kind of up in aligned incentives, right? If you follow the money, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, right? And so like if you hire a seller's broker in this case, I mean, they're incentivized to go get the best price because they're going to get the best commission.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty simple.
Yeah. It's like same thing with like real estate. Oh, I can use no-com or low-com or whatever, and 1% commission, and no realtors will bring anyone to your house. Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, there's no incentives. There's no aligned incentives.
Oh, that house, I think, has problems, Yeah.
I did. Yeah. And, and I was really more scared about getting a job than starting the company. Because, so I went to the customers and I begged some customers to give me a second chance. And I went to some of our vendors that were not paid and begged them to give me a second chance. And I think a lot of them moved on and they said, no, we're going to move to someone else and as our channel in Canada. But some of them, I offered them all the same thing. I said, I'll pay you back every penny you lost with a company that I no longer owned. I was just a shareholder in another company that owned that company. And so about 10 of the lines ended up coming with me. Of the large carriers in Canada, only one of them agreed to cut me any orders. And the other one's like, black marked me at that time. And we did win them all back over time. But in the beginning, there was only one that agreed to give us business, and a lot of lecturing and whining about the problems we'd caused them and delayed supply chain, because we're supplying like antennas to the and so they're putting up like hundreds of towers and stuff, right? So 50 antennas don't show up. There's crews, there's all the people at the carriers that are in the technical side, all their money they make by turning up the tower on the day they say they're going to turn it up. They miss that, they miss their bonus, right? And so we caused some damage in doing that. But anyways, restarted it in 2007. We grew the company around 2015-ish. The brokers and peddlers of one flavor or another on company acquisitions started kicking the tires, wanting to do NDAs and look at the numbers and start offers. And of course, I had a partner and an investor in that company as well. So, you take the numbers and divide them by the owners, and, the numbers weren't big enough in 2015, 2016 or whatever, but we were getting a sense of what would happen. And so we just started doing what we were doing and growing the business. We ultimately sold it in 2022. The big lessons that were learned there were in 2019, we were up to 80 people. We had broken my cardinal rule, which was we had made decisions that could break the company. One single decision could break a company. And that was one of my golden rules, never to do that. And it was a kind of a multi-level decision, in the sense that one, we exercised the reverse Midas touch, meaning we started getting involved in business that we knew nothing about, thinking that everything we touched would turn to gold because we were making so much money doing what we were doing. So we assumed, well, we're selling products to the cell phone industry. Why don't we open a donut shop? It wasn't a donut shop. I mean, I'll explain it, but nonetheless, you got like, what do I know about cooking and selling donuts? Like nothing, right? But you just think like, I'm so successful, I'm going to throw a few $100K at this. And, the mistakes that we were making is one, you kind of just throw money at it, and because the money's kind of coming, let's say, easy. I use that carefully, but I mean, you're making good money. And so someone has an idea, you give them the money, but you also don't give them the time, right? Because you're really sort of occupied by your own business. So you're not spending any time on the new venture. All you're doing is sending them your good money. And so we got involved in installing the products into the network. And we ended up competing with some of our best customers. They got mad, didn't want to deal with us. And then ultimately the general manager we had hired to run that division, I'll say this, as affectionately as I can, ran it into the ground. And we didn't have enough financial controls to understand that we were around negative 1.2 million in 2019. And we had tripped all the covenants with our bank and our line of credit, and debt to equity and all the different covenants that come with the line of credit, and where you have to have a certain amount of debt or a certain amount of EBITDA or whatever the covenant is, right? We tripped them all. And of course we had personal guarantees with our houses. We had to try to recapitalize. But in 2019, I had to make the decision to go from 80 people to 29 people virtually overnight.
Wow.
And strip the company down to its lowest
just to get the company back into covenants with your banks.
Yeah. Now, we were lucky in a way, and I mean, this is the part that I tell everyone. I went to my partner and I said, we got to go from 80 people to 29 people. And he's like, oh, okay. And how are we going to do that? Which I'll explain in a minute. And he goes, well, when are we going to do it? I go, well, it's 8 a.m. We'll be done by 10, meaning, in 2 hours, we're going to fire 50 people. Right. But we had already been trying to figure out ways of selling this division. Several of our customers that were mad that we were kind of competing with them were more than willing to take the company and the 40 people and take over all these contracts with the Canadian carriers all the contracts were fine. But he didn't know how to run them profitably. You got all these insurance policies, all these trucks, bucket trucks, lift trucks, all this equipment out there, all these people, all this insurance, all this safety and fall mitigation. And it's like crazy, right? And so 40 of the people, went to a deal that we were able to cook up on the phone with the guy for selling it, for the price of our assets, which was minimal, like fall gear and ladders and a couple trucks and whatever, right? And then we had this drone division selling drones that were carrying instruments that were measuring cell phone stuff. We sold that to a US drone company that wanted a Canadian branch. So that got us like 46, right? And the rest of them were some layoffs. And so everyone within minutes really of getting laid off, transferred, or sold off really had a job. So my conscience was reasonably clear that nobody really landed hard, right? And we did it all in one day, and we went to 29 people. It was back to our core distribution focus on the carriers. And then that led us to 2020, 21, 22. That was the beginning of the pandemic. We were labeled an essential service by the Canadian government, and the carriers, we weren't allowed to close. We weren't allowed to downsize in any way, shape, or form. And so, I went to work every day during the pandemic. Of course, I wasn't able to leave my house at night, but I was able to go to work in the day. And we had our three best years, 2020, 21, 22. And the private equity came knocking in 2022.
Oh, nice.
And we had balanced out the 3 years of, because they always take the last 3 years, right? Those were our best 3 years of our history. And because of the pandemic, we all know, everything boomed during the pandemic for the most part, except for maybe restaurants. But electronic infrastructure boomed. And so we got a great number. It was private equity. It was all cash. And
learned your lesson on that the first time, right?
The genius. Yeah, right. Except there's always a but, right? And people are like, all cash, great. You finally learned your lesson, right? And I'm like, yeah, but you got to remember, when you do a deal with private equity, there's a number, but 10% of it is on a warranty. You don't get that for 6 months, right? And then there's a 15% earnout, that you got to hit these numbers. All the companies they bought, except ours, none of them hit their earnouts in the period that their earnout was defined. Ours was a 1-year earnout. We hit ours and then some, and we actually made them so much money in 2022 that we bought ourselves back almost to the tune of over 50%. Like, they made back half their money in a year, right? And there was no accelerator on the earnout. It was like a number. You hit it, you get it. You don't hit it, you don't get it. But if you hit it times 3 or 4 or 5, you get nothing.
A lot of terms in there that founders may not be familiar with. What's a warranty, for instance?
So the warranty is like that you didn't say that, like there was something related to, poor service, broken stuff that you didn't tell them about, bad deal, bad debt. There's a whole list of things, and it's a warranty that the deal was properly papered and that you didn't lie about anything.
And then what happens if they find something that you didn't disclose and they can prove that you knew about it?
They have to prove the value. They have to kind of like valuize it, know, and then. Yeah,
and that hurts
it's up to 10%.
Eventual earnout and the eventual price, basically.
It might affect that as well, but it's a different number. The 10% was, let's say it was $1 million. Like, they would put $100,000 in a bank. And the lawyer actually had that money, so that if we had no warranty claims, we get it the day that, and we did get it. We got it, nice. No problem.
Okay. So that's the warranty. So it's 10% warranty.
Earnout, and then the earnout was a calculation, and it was very simple for us. It was generating a specific amount of gross margin, not top line, not bottom line, but pure gross margin, right?
Yeah.
And so
after basically your cogs, your cost of goods sold. If you maintain this kind of margin over the next 12 months, you get this 15% bonus.
Exactly. But it was part of the total number, right? It wasn't a bonus.
Right.
Yeah. On $1 million deal, $150K was in another account, right? And so, like I said, all the other companies they had bought, none of them hit their earnouts, and they got nothing. And that's where
equity. I don't know what the percentage is, but I've been through a few transactions as an employee or a key employee, and in startup land in Silicon Valley, and you kind of get this like earnout if you hit these numbers. And I think I've only been through that situation twice, and we did not hit the numbers both times.
Right, and that's where you learn about the binary aspect of it. There's not a lot of like variability to it, right? Like, it's not like, well, if you get to 70%, you get something, right? It's like you got to hit 100% or it's zero.
Yeah.
And over 280% over target, you still get only.
I think ours had actual tiers. I think it was like one number at 95%, one number at 100.
Okay, so some of them do have the 95s and whatever, but it's kind of a hard reality, because what if you're at 94.9? Like, there's no nuance to it, right? And the owner's like, well, I work like crazy, and then there was that currency problem, and then there was the the return and the bad debt and whatever, and blah blah blah. 94.9, too bad you had zero, right? And so then what happened next was, well, they're giving you and again, we're using $1 million as the thing, right? They're like, so 10% goes to the lawyer, 15% is on hold for the earnout, right? And then, well, they're shaking your hand, right? They're putting their hand in your back pocket and saying, everyone rolls back in like 30 to 40%, Glenn, into the deal.
Oh, they basically want to take your proceeds and roll it back in as on the cap table.
Exactly. And so I'm not buying my own company back. I'm buying into the higher level entity that's buying me and becoming a fractional 1% shareholder kind of a thing, right? And they're like, but you get a that's where you get to get another bite of the apple. That's where you get another, that's where they give me all these like private equity terms that sound so enticing, especially in 2022 when the market, we went from zero in 2007,
That's
$1
why
million
I don't work
our
in
first year
private
to,
equity, by the way. I just don't like the zero sum game of it.
right.
No offense to my private equity partners out there, but
I hear you. Yeah, so we were at 84 million when we sold it in revenue, and the year we sold, right? So we grew the company handsomely, and we were, the recency bias, especially in the financial markets, is like whatever's happening now will keep happening. Whether it's like right now the markets are kind of down, and gold is up, silver's up, crypto's down. Everyone thinks that whatever is now is going to continue on, and the housing market's down, so it's going to stay down. But that's not really. But so, anyways, in 2022, we thought we could do no wrong, and they paint it as it's not only do you get another bite of the apple, but the apple's 5 times bigger because we're moving you into a bigger stack, higher multiple. So you're rolling in 30 or 40% of the number, but that's now getting multiplied by 5 in your mind, right? And then in 2023, the company kind of tanked because of the global markets tanked in 23, 24. We're all been struggling ever since the height in 2022, and they're still clawing their way back. And so what was supposed to be sort of a 3 to 5 year window for the bite, is being extended on because they're kind of clawing their way back. Will they do it? I hope so. I mean, I don't work there anymore, but I have all that, it's just an internal stress, right? So next time I'd say, maybe if I had to, I'd roll in a small amount, 5% or something, just to stay on side with them or whatever. But I mean, I kind of got greedy because so I rolled in kind of the maximum amount, right? And still did very well in terms of, the amount I took out. I got my earnout, I got my warranty money and all that. So we'll see what happens. And they've staffed up the company fairly well with some big guys and to grow the business to the next level. And I'm hoping they do. But those are the things that you learn, right? And so no matter what, you're always learning. And when you're just a business operator, there's a lot of other things about business that you just don't know until you kind of went through them, right?
Right. Yeah. This is why we like second time founders. And then, so what happened next?
So they offered me a job with no really end date, but it had a very specific exit clause. Like I knew exactly what I would get when I left. It was very, very cut and dry. And so I wasn't ever fearful about getting fired or whatever. I knew what I would be faced with, and I had plenty of time to reestablish myself. But a year or so in, I realized a few things, like one, that I wouldn't be cut out long-term for working for a private equity owned subsidiary, part of the business, not in the private equity, but in the operating business underneath this, through that, it just didn't feel the same as running the business yourself. So I thought, I got to do something. And I started hearing about the E2 visa process for Canada, where you can buy business in the US, you invest a reasonable amount of money, hire some American people, and you can get a visa for 5-year increments. It's not an immigration product. It's a residency product and a tax product. So you can work in the US, your spouse can work in the US, you can live in the US, your kids can come, but it's not a green card thing. It's for investing and for running a business. So I started looking around, and I found a business in Florida that did the same thing I was doing at my other 2 companies, except in a different industry, so that my conscience would be clear and my covenants would be clear in terms of any no competes, even though I wasn't restricted in the US anyways, but nonetheless. So I transferred. Instead of selling equipment into the network of the cell phone industry, we sell equipment and testing solutions into the power industry. Still towers, but it's got 500 kilovolt lines on them instead of cell phone antennas, right? And instead of having base stations, on the tower, at the bottom of the tower, it has transformers, breakers, batteries. And we import products from around the world, same as I did in my other, and we sell them in the US market. We service it, train them, support them. And we represent those companies from around the world in the US market. So it's really the same kind of business. So there's really no learning curve on how the business works. I just need to learn the customers and the vendors, and and then just start applying the same methodologies I was using before, or ones I was learning now that I thought would grow the business. And that's where I'm at right now. So bought it 2 years ago. First year I was still working for the company, so I was kind of doing moonlighting and a side hustle. But a year ago I moved to Florida, and so I've been at it a couple of years, growing the business. And so kind of doubled the business, doubled the size of the sales force, the number of vendors, the top line, plugging away for a few years to see where it all ends up. 2-3 years from now.
Talk about good timing.
Yeah, it was great. And I mean, and the company was celebrating its 20th anniversary, it just in December, right? So it's kind of, I take over this company, I'm like celebrating 20 years in business, right? And so that's the other thing I learned, right? The third time is like, I'm not starting over from scratch, right? And especially with all the regulations for new businesses and banking and this and that, whatever. So I bought a business with 20 years of customers, 20 years of vendors, 20-year banking relationship and insurance and all that. And so, very, very well established, set up at all the major customers, just have to, grow the business, right? Grow the top line. And so I often say to people now, like, don't fluff that off too quickly or whatever about buying a business. There's a million guys that are 75 or 80 years old and their kids that want nothing to do with their company, but the company is very valuable, and they end up like just shutting it down because nobody will buy it and nobody will take it. And so, figure out your geography, figure out your market that you want to be in, the kind of business that you want, and then go knocking on doors to owners, especially ones with gray hair, and say, hey, have you ever thought of selling your business? And a lot of them was like, well, no, but what are you offering, right? And I'm 75, my kids are bums, and that's kind of the situation I was in. The guy was retiring, had no one internal in the business to sell it to, and no family to give it to or trade it with, there was no competition, so I was able to craft a deal that allowed me to get in for a reasonable amount of money, pay it off over some time. It wasn't a bidding war with a bunch of private equity guys and multiples and this and that. So, yeah.
Amazing. The timing right now for power is insane with data center growth. What are you seeing on the ground there?
Yeah. So that's I'm not sure what we would call it, like, but it's amazingly good timing. And, the government has to print money for the economy. And so they have to, the liquidity is going up. And so they're going to be printing money and spending money. And a lot of it's going to go into the power grid, right? So it's going to trickle down. And so there's a huge demand for power for the data centers. And so much so that really the power is pretty much sold out for the next 20 years, right? Like it's, and don't quote me on this. I haven't actually fact checked this one, but I'm pretty sure that I heard that 3 Mile Island is reopening, which is kind of shocking. But in addition to that Microsoft bought 20 years of every gigawatt they're going to produce over the next 20 years. It's already sold out. They own all the power that'll come from that. And so these power centers are being created, and large data centers are pre-purchasing a 20-year contract to take all the power. There's a huge demand for the infrastructure to generate the power and deliver it, but also to test it and monitor it. And that's where we come in. And so that's what we're focusing on as our growth, right?
Pretty amazing. So it's like your third rodeo in a similar industry.
Yeah.
What are you kind of doing this third time around that you've kind of, learned from the prior 2 times?
So in the last third of the second company, I had started with the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS. And so, of course, the business I bought was much smaller, so it felt a little bit small to engage the EOS team directly.
EOS,
but I brought the EOS is an operating system for businesses where it literally shows you how to map out all your processes, how to put the right people in the right seats, and it's a structured, curated way of really running a business. And it sets the cadence for meetings, how meetings are run, how people are, core values. There's a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 10-year plan, and it's a very, very structured. There's about 80,000 companies around the world on it now. It really helped us. We put it in 2019 after we scaled down, and it was really pivotal in helping us to grow the business professionally and make sure we had the right people doing the right jobs, which we didn't before. And so now I'm realizing that I can apply that same thing in a smaller way, but the world has also moved to this whole fractional. So I have a fractional CTO, I have a fractional CMO, and I have a fractional CTO, CMO, and CFO. Right. So I'm getting guys that are super expensive that I couldn't afford. And some of them are working 4 hours a month. Some of them are, 10 hours a week. But I'm adopting that whole fractional approach. So I'm getting the best person to do these particular roles that I know that I need in order to grow the business. But I'm not trying to hire a, $200,000 CFO, for a small business that I can't afford. Right.
Right.
And So I'm loving this fractional thing, you know,
It's
and
kind of the
these are
same way we
guys that
scale Team Ignite as well. We hire a bunch of
right.
fractional people and contractors, and they're all leveraging AI anyway. And so they're all, you know, 3 times more efficient than they were 5 years ago.
Absolutely. As am I. I mean, you know, most of my lawyer stuff now is all done through AI, and, you know, I take it the last mile to make sure it's fine. And of course they have to tweak it because, you know, you didn't get it quite right, Glenn, right? I'm like, oh, okay, you know, kind of thing. Like, meanwhile, the contracts are almost bulletproof that you can generate. And, you know, I'm using AI for marketing. I'm using AI to help me for day-to-day financial analysis. I pretty much drop everything into some sort of agentic model to make sure I'm doing it right. And, you know, and sometimes I don't take its advice. Sometimes I do. But it's amazing to have such a resource you know, available. You know, and in the past, I was always using Google and everything. I was getting all these random, you know, like links to websites or whatever. But now having it under an AI, you know, umbrella, it's amazing, right?
Somewhere along the way, you wrote a book. Tell us about that.
I did. Yeah. So I wrote the book during the pandemic when I was locked up at night after I came home from work, right? And I'd been writing down these rules ever since 1985. I was thinking, okay, that's a rule I don't want to forget. And I had a book and I was writing them down in this notebook and sharing them with people over the years. And people would laugh and say, oh, you know, can you come to my sales meeting and share some of those stories? They're pretty funny, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then people were like, oh, you should write a book. And of course, I never did. And then till the pandemic rolled around and I had the time and I opened it up and I had all these factors, I called them. And I basically just started writing, you know, I went to Google. This was before ChatGPT. So I wrote it all myself. And, you know, I was like, but I did ask Google, like, how many words do I need for a business book? And they said 75,000 is about right. So I just, every weekend, I wrote 2,500 words. Till I got to 75,000 words. Sent it to the first editor. It was, again, fractional editor I hired on Fiverr or something. She sent it back to me, Glenn. She says, Glenn, you can't say the F word that many times in a book. And I'm like, oh, okay, can we settle on 71,000 words then? And so that's where we landed. 71,000 words and only 3 F words, a couple of goddammits. And, you know,
how much, I'm writing a book right now. How much did the editor cost? It's a similar length book, actually.
Yeah, the first, like, I had the content editor and then the copy editor, right? And they were both like between like 1,000 and 2,000, and there were several iterations. It was very cost effective.
Yeah,
still a fair chunk of change. It wasn't like 300. You can get like guys on Fiverr to do it for $300, but I'll do X amount of characters for $300, right? But all of a sudden you realize, well, I have $2,000, so it's $2,000. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
they just go. They'll just read it for continuity and flow and kind of clean it up.
Yeah, and I've used them for many things, like the editors on Fiverr and related things, and they are all very good. But I'm just saying, like, when you see $300, you know, that's $300 for chapter 1, right? Like, and so, but also the cover, you get that from someone else on Fiverr, and then the one really handy one is the person that will put it in a format that you can just upload to Amazon,
Kindle,
because Amazon prints the books for you.
Yeah,
and right, they'll put it on the Kindle.
So you self-publish.
Yeah, self-published. Yeah.
Nice. What are some takeaways from the book? What was the book about?
So the book was 57 factors on building a career in business and sales. And so it's just 57 random rules that I had learned along the way. I'm happy to share a few with you. Most of them at the beginning are all about sales. I think we'll
cover all 57, but maybe we can cover like a few of the top ones that are differentiated, maybe. Yeah.
No problem. I'll jump right in a sec. In the middle, it's more about rapport. The whole book is mainly about how to get in front of your customers, act, and stay in front of them, and be a pleasure to do business with, always, right? Even when you're losing business. And so it talks about rapport, and then, you know, breaks down into like margin, and, you know, if there's no margin, there's no deal. And, you know, so some of the financial aspects of deals when you think you're selling, but you're not. And so, you know, the book is called Never Sit in the Lobby. And that's one of the main rules at the beginning in the sales area, which is when you get to a customer, don't sit down in the lobby and start getting on your phone, going over the shopping list with your wife, because your customer is going to walk out and, you know, you're going to be in the middle of texting your wife and he's like, oh, are you Glenn? And you're like, you know, looking all spazzy, and it's just not a good look, right? And I'm all about not being not a good look, right? Everything is not a good look avoidance, in my opinion. So everything you do has to be structured around putting your best foot forward at all times, and every impression is a forever impression. And so they all have to be perfect, right? So I never sit in the lobby, right? And so, well, what do you do if you're not sitting in the lobby? Well, you show up on time and you announce yourself, right? You always have something in your hand, something in your mind, right? Something to give the person when they come out, something to tell them when they walk out. So there's no fuddling about what you're doing, right? Well, what if you arrived, you want to be 15 minutes early? Well, then you sit in your car and you practice the never forget a face rule. So you go to your phone, you look at the customer, who have I visited here in the last 10 years? And you remember every single person's face in your car. Go to LinkedIn, remember, Bob's the tall guy, Jack's the short guy, Sally's the redhead, whatever it is, you got to remember. And because you're pulling it from your long-term memory to your short-term memory, right? And I always equate it to, hey, have you ever gone to your kid's soccer game and the couple walks out and says, good, it's so good to see you. And they're like, oh, wow, how's the wife? And they know the wife's name and your two kids' name. You're like, who the hell is this? Like, I don't remember their name.
I have right? that happen to me all the time.
Yeah, right. And so you can't avoid it in those situations. But, my wife and I, we have a thing, right, where we always lead with the names and we pull things out to, embarrassment avoidance, right, in those situations. And whenever I show up somewhere, I say, always use the name, so that but in work, I remember before and the reason why is because after you have something in your hand, in your mind, you always ask for a mini tour, right? That's another one of my key rules. And people are like, what are you talking about, a mini tour? And I'm like, well, it's a mini tour because tours take all day and nobody wants to go on a 4-hour tour. So you want to get behind the veil, behind the Wizard of Oz screen and see what the customer's doing. Because it doesn't matter what your product, service, software, doesn't matter. He's using it as at their work, right? You got to get to the situation where they're using it so you can see the competitors in play. Are you is this a greenfield installation and you got a level playing field with the competitors? Or do they always buy IBM and they're just using you to keep IBM honest because the last 9 systems they bought from IBM, right? They want to get the price down. And you can only do that by getting into where they're going to set it up, right? So it's like, hey, can I get a little mini tour where you're going to be using this, that, or the other thing, right? And then when you're walking through the building to get to the mini tour, guess who you're going to walk by? Jack, Sally, and Bob, right? Hey, Bob, Jack, Sally, right? And they're like, oh, I love that Glenn guy. He's always remembers my name. Such a pleasure to do business with, right? So that's some of the sales things, Then I won't go into it, keep rambling on, but there's ones on how to make presentations proper. I have a Goldilocks principle. Everything's the power of 3, small, medium, large, good, better, best. Everything packaged in 3s will resonate in people's minds the best. My key presentation is the punch, perfect pitch, and close. So you punch them and then you perfect pitch them. And the perfect pitch is a series of Goldilocks principles where, you tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told. You tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, right? So that's the first one. You present 3 points, which demonstrate the solution to the problem while you're there. You don't show them ancillary things about why your thing is great. You only show them enough to solve their particular problem. And at the end, they usually say, well, how long will it take to get it? Or how much does it cost, right? That's the close. They close themselves, right? The punch is sort of what it isn't. Is you don't start with PowerPoint where you're like, oh, I'd like to show you that we have a factory in Japan with 1,200 people and our head office is in Sweden where we've got 4,000 people and 600 engineers. And, oh, I'm asleep. 2 guys have already checked out permanently or not coming back, right? You want to either show them a sound, a clip, a state of fact, something that will jostle their reality and wake them up to the, you asked me here to talk about product throughput. We can produce this product 10 times faster than you're doing it right now. You know what I mean? I'm just making these up just for, demonstration. But a lot of times you want to show them a video of the short clip with good sound where another customer is enjoying the exact benefit that they are there for, right? And then just to back up a little bit is that most sales guys show up and they haven't researched what the customer really does. So they don't really know what problem they're solving. Right. And that's the biggest thing is to learn how your customer makes their money. And so that you can go in at a higher level and explain to them and one of the examples I give just to give it a context is like Xerox. Right. And a lot of people think Xerox makes photocopiers, but they're actually a bank, right? They're a finance company. They don't make they make photocopiers, but that's not how they make their money. They make their money leasing you photocopiers with ridiculous service contracts and pennies per page things. And, it's not about the photocopier. They have a litany of photocopiers they can offer you, but what they're doing is selling you 4 cents a page, 9 cents a page, right? Oh, you want service contract? That's 12 cents a page, unlimited, right? Oh, you want to buy this machine? No problem. We'll finance those for you. at X% interest and whatever, right? And so if you go into Xerox thinking that they're a photocopier company and that it's all about that, you're missing the window, because the people that sign the checks at the top, they own a finance company. That's what they're, right? So you want to learn that about your customer. And so there's a bunch of talk about that. And, and then there's more fun things like where to sit at dinner, what to order, how not to embarrass yourself at dinner with clients.
Yeah, tell us
more
about dinner. I'd love to hear some of the advice that you've
some of it's what not to do, right? So, and of course you learn these the hard way, right? And so one of them is like, you're going to dinner with the client, like, where do you sit, right? It's like 6 people. And so I'm like, where are you going to sit, right? When are you going to show up, right?
Yeah,
one, you got to be the first
table
one
on one side of the table, probably, for me, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
That way I can talk to everybody at the table. Yeah,
exactly. And most people try to like navigate towards an important person, right? But like, for instance, maybe the CEO's at the head of the table, so they try to get beside him, but he's boring, quiet, and preoccupied, and the guy beside you, or where you kind of get jostled into, is also boring and ineffectual on the deal, and you can't communicate with the guys down at the end that are having this massive conversation, right? And so you want to be back to the wall so you can see out and everything, nothing behind you to distract you, in the dead center if possible, and you control the entire table, right? And I always caution people to be careful what they order, right? Because it says something about you. And it was really more of just pick something that's middle of the road, or that's
your steak and potatoes kind of thing, like just pretty average.
Exactly. Yeah. The salmon with such and such, right? Maybe you're kind of like parroting in a way what the customers are doing, but don't do, what I call the Quigley factor, right? A lot of them are called factors, right? The Quigley factor is where you go in, you open up the menu, and you go, whatever's the most expensive, that's what you're ordering. Even if it's steak tartare, with liver guts of the bubble fish or whatever, right? Like, that's what you're ordering because it's the most expensive. You start with the most expensive scotch, then you get the most expensive appetizer, then you order the steak tartare, and then at the end you have an Irish coffee and the most expensive, and I've seen a lot of people do these things, right? And again, I'm appealing to salespeople, not the customer, right? If the customer wants to order steak tartare, go ahead. I don't care. You're demonstrating how you behave in front of the customer. If the customer sees you ordering, the most expensive things or whatever, he might consider you a bragger or whatever, and if you're with your boss
and you're trying to sell them something, so now they're thinking like, well, I'm making really good money. That. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, so he's like, don't do a Quigley. Don't do the Quigley. Right. And so these rules over time, they all have names. Right. And so and so you communicate to your coworkers in a code, in a language that no one understands. Right. And like one is, like do the Barry Watson. Right. And so the Barry Watson, that's a purchasing methodology that you end up using and of course, this is not rocket science, right? Like, all my stuff is basic, right? But the Barry Watson is where the specific Barry Watson is, you get a nice huge order from your customer, right? Let's say it's like $100,000 system or whatever. And, maybe you make, 20 points on it or something, right? So you're buying it for like approximately 80K, right? Plus or minus. Not that's, you got to know the difference between margin and markup, but nonetheless, but you call the vendor and you say, you've already got the PO in your hand, right? You already have the order, but he doesn't know that, right? You're like, man, we're down to the wire. IBM's in there. They are grinding it. Do you think you can get the 80 down to 75? Maybe pull in the lead time a bit, move it up in the delivery chain. If I can get it at 75, I'm convinced I can get an order in the next day, right? Okay, fine. But it's only good to the end of this week, right? 75, boom, you just made 5 extra points on the deal. That's the Barry Watson, right? And of course, when you're doing
what's Barry, who is Barry Watson? Where does this come from?
Barry Watson's the guy that taught me how to do it.
Nice. All right.
Right now, and of course, you don't always get to do it because a lot of your vendors, you have set pricing and it just is what it is, right? Yeah. We got to understand that the margins at the manufacturing level are massive compared to a distributor. And I've always worked for distributors. For me, the difference between 20 and 22 points is huge, right? They're making 50 and 60 and 70 points margin. So, it's not, I don't find it to be ethically, you don't want to be, like a crook about it, but there are times where it makes sense.
Well, yeah,
And
you have
so,
leverage, and you are a
yeah,
middleman, like in this equation.
exactly.
And this goes out to like if
Right.
you're a value-added reseller and you're selling Microsoft or Google
Right.
products or whatever.
Yeah,
you're in the middle, right? And
exactly.
you gotta squeeze
Barry
out those
Watson's
points
your
of
best
margin
friend.
however you can get them.
Yeah. So, and there's a bunch of talk in there about, just how not to be getting abused by your customers, right? Like you got to understand that you're a human being with the exact same human value that they have, right? And yeah, there's certain statures and whatever, and you're meeting the CEO, and I get all that, but still, they're not a better person than you, right? So your time is just as valuable as theirs, especially when you're saving them time and money and whatever, right? Maybe bringing them a solution they never thought of, and then the other part, there's things in the book and stories that I explain about how I used to go work on trying to find business for my customers. And so, and then you create this incredible reciprocity angle that kicks in on them that's hard for them. And they have to alleviate the feeling of reciprocity by finding you some business at their company, right? It's like, they sell, widgets of some sort. You're somewhere and you think, oh my God, they could buy widgets. I'm going to call the vice president of sales of my customer who I want to sell my widgets to and get him a deal for widgets, right? And he ends up calling the VP of engineering and gets you a meeting you could never get. So if you find business for your customers, then you become a partner, right? And there's a great story in there of where it was like just a perfect circle of love where I was finding customers business, and came all full circle, and it ended up being extremely profitable for everybody. And
I mean, amazing. I have to go read the book now or recommend it to all my founders. There's just so much sales wisdom, that you've accumulated over decades. Any other final stories or rules from that book you want to highlight for founders listening?
The one I kind of touched on it a little bit, but the one, anyone that's, especially starting out or whatever, I always like to end with this, one of the chapters called "You Only Get Forever to Make Another Impression." And even to this day, every minute of my job in sales since 1985, this rule, it proves itself out, right? And the thing is like your mom taught you, always make a good first impression, right? And that's the basis of a relationship that carries on over time. But what she didn't tell you was that you have to, at work, when your career is at stake, you have to treat every impression like a first impression. And what ends up happening is that, the boss walks in and he walks by two different people, right? Jack, who he sees on Instagram, alt-tabbing over to the CRM as he's walking by because he heard his footsteps, right? And Sally, right, who's either pounding the phone, or she's saying to the CEO, hey, can you remind me of that such and such when we got such and such or whatever? And, I got this crazy deal. It's going to be outstanding, right? And then a week later, the CEO walks by. Now he's on Facebook and the alt tabs over to the CRM. And guess what? Sally's on the phone again. Then all of a sudden comes time where they need to pick a senior sales rep to handle the IBM account.
The new territory or whatever, the new big account. Yeah.
Right. And then you say to yourself, when you read these stories or hear these these clips on Instagram where it says like, Jack started as the tow motor operator in the warehouse and now he's the CEO 40 years later. How did he do that? Because everything that he did was a first impression. He treated every impression like a first impression. And I just tell people, like, wherever you're at, look in your company and figure out who you need to kill to get to the top spot. Like, that's your job, right? Right. And how do you take them out? Most of them get taken out by attrition, but some of them you need to trip in the hallway or, whatever. Right. And of course, I'm trying to be funny so that the stories resonate and stick. Right. But that's really what it's all about. Like, how do you get from here to here to here to here to here? Right. And you gotta impression your way there. You start as salesman, sales manager, district manager, vice president of sales, chief revenue officer, and then executive vice president and then CEO, right? And you got to figure out who to take out on the way and you got to do better than them, right? So
yeah, and that works internally and externally too with your competition, right? Because you're out there pitching your product or service. new customers, and it's all the little micro impressions
right
that make an impact.
Yeah, and just the final piece of that, because a lot of people at the end say, well, how do I do that and whatever, like, I mean, and I'm like, well, one, always be engaging with those people whenever possible, but two, one of the golden ways of doing it is if you're ever involved in the trade show aspect of your company's business. A lot of times you get dragged to a trade show, right? And it is a bit of a grind, so it's really difficult, but the win out of this is amazing if you can, because most people show up and there's lulls in it, right? And everyone starts complaining and whining and their feet are sore and they want to sit down and they sneak out of the booth. They don't come back for 2 hours, right? So when you go to the booth, you want to, first of all, you want to go there early and help everyone, whoever it is, set up every time. And you always want to be there on the last day and help them tear down. Never leave early and never come late, right? Now, if you're being flown in or whatever, obviously you got to adjust. But what I'm saying is, if you can be there to help set up, set up. If you can be there to tear down, right? That's one. While you're there, don't leave the booth, right? Except to go get your food, eat, and come back, right? Reasonable, go to the bathroom, come back. Never sit in the booth, right? Always try to stand in the booth. If it's slow, go in the hall.
Get a phone pad to stand on in the booth as well.
Pull them out. Pull them in. And when there's no one in the aisle to pull in, look in your booth, because a lot of times they fly the VP of the divisions in for, to show them off at the trade shows. You interview each one of the VPs while you're there. Okay, you're the VP of this department. What makes your stuff so great? Why? How do I sell it? What are the 5 things I know in order to kill this product out in the industry, right? And at the end, what ends up happening is some months later, they reflect on that guy that was in the booth. It was just unbelievable. Right. And you end up seeing it all the time. I mean, I still do trade shows and whatever. And I have guys that come in and I have guys that sneak off and guys that are in the aisle pulling people in, so I know who's getting a promotion and I know who, might be questionable or whatever. Right.
I guess the question is, like, for founders listening out there, founders are going to do all this naturally. They're selling their own book, right? They're creating the company and they're out there doing founder-led sales. For sales leaders listening out there and founders listening out there that are managing their sales teams, how do you create that level of motivation for your team members?
Well, I mean, one is you have to set the core values of the business that you want people to, so you need to make those things part of the core values, and the core values need to reflect that behavior that you want. And then you need to hire, fire, train, motivate, bonus, and otherwise along the lines of your core values. You need to be calling them out at all times. All bonuses need to reflect a core value, and there needs to be core value violation call outs as well, right? And even if it's your top dog, but he violates all the core values, then he becomes like, an enemy, they call him in the EOS system, right? Where he sells the most, but he drags down the corporate culture because he never follows any of the rules, right? You got to let that guy go. It's hard as it is, because they have to be above the line on all your core values, or par at even keel, but they can't be below the line.
They can't detract.
And right, exactly. And so to me, it always boils down to that, in your core values and setting the thing and making sure you're rewarding people for it. And then people always do what you pay them for. Right? Like, they game the system, and however you pay them, they figure out that to do whatever's needed to maximize the pay for that. So you need to structure your incentives
and outcomes. Again, there it is again.
Exactly.
Right? So you need to structure the incentives to get the outcomes you want.
Yeah.
And the incentives need to be aligned to your values, not just the bottom line revenue that you brought in.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, don't have things like Christmas bonuses, right? Like, the bonuses need to be tied to specific things, because everyone's like, oh, well, where's my Christmas bonus? Like, every year I get a Christmas bonus.
It's like the national Christmas vacation.
Go look in the exactly. Yeah. Yeah. With the pool, right?
Yeah.
Or is it a swimming pool?
One of my favorite Christmas movies. Yeah.
Exactly.
He's expecting it, right? It's going to come, right?
He's already bought the pool. And you want to know, like, I literally had a guy in my company that literally bought the pool in, like, and it wasn't for the Christmas bonus, but it was for like profit sharing. And it was a mathematical, the profit sharing thing was kind of mathematical or whatever. And he ended up making out okay or whatever. But I'm like, who does that? Like, oh, well, I'm going to get profit sharing. Like, how do you know? It's 9 months from now, right?
What's next for you? Let's looking forward 5 or 10 years. I mean, you got the gray hair.
Yeah.
Are you going to be selling your firm pretty soon? Like, what's next for you?
Well, not soon. I mean, probably 3 years or something like that, maybe 3 to 5 years. And I also have like 5 kids, and they're at that age where, first they worry you to death, and then they just try to milk you to death for like, the older they get, the bigger their problems are financially.
How do you handle that as your kids get older? Because I feel like I grew up poor and had to work for everything I had, right? And so I just have like a fire in my belly kind of thing, or a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
My kids are growing up upper middle class, and I worry about that.
Right.
Like, how do I instill like a fire in their belly,
I don't really know. I'm not sure I have a good answer for you, but I mean, like for me, I don't just hand out money or anything like that. So there's a definitely an accountability. And, but what I'm saying is like, there's enough people in my downline that I have to support that I want to make sure I have enough. Right. So that's what, when I sell the business or whatever, I also, my pastimes are, I have French bulldogs, right? So I'm always with my dogs, and they're at doggy daycare today, but normally they're here with me. And then also I'm what's called a charity DJ, right? And they're like, what's a charity DJ, right? And it's like a mini tour, right? It's like a tour that's mini, right? Well, a charity DJ is a DJ that doesn't cost a lot, and charities love to hire them, right? And so, and this is mainly in Canada, and I still go back and forth. And so I'm now down to, 6 to 10 gigs per year, but now I can be selective. And these nonprofits in Toronto are aware of me, and they hire me year in, year out to do these large events for them, because I charge them the price of the gear, the insurance, the transportation, plus a small fee. And they're saving thousands of dollars sometimes on these. And I get to play events with 1,200 people. I bring in the big gears, the big lights, play with my stuff, and I have crowds that are enthusiastic, and it's fun, and I love doing that, right? So I'm trying to figure out, hey, can I bring some of that?
Gets the people going as a DJ? Like, what's the one where you're like, I'm pulling this one out, this is it?
One of the genres that's the best is to go back to the disco genre and play a few of the Bee Gees songs, September, YMCA, and whatever. Then there's a few rock songs, like a couple of AC/DC tracks, and Monet Monet, and those. And you got to move through the different genres or whatever, and
kind of see where the crowd's kind of vibing. Are they vibing more with the 60s or the 80s or the 90s, and you kind of figure it out, right?
Yeah. And then there's like the whole like Avicii and and stuff like that, EDM kind of songs, where there's a basket of those that never fail. Yeah. And so now there's just so many genres, but with streaming and all the services that I have access to, like Tidal, and I can, there's no song that can be unplayed. If it exists, I can download it in real time.
Yeah.
Right.
Anybody walks up and says, hey, can you do this like niche song that like you've never heard of? You can go find it and go listen to it real quick.
Exactly.
I can see that vibes.
I can do that. Yeah. Right.
I can mix that in a bit,
Yeah.
Especially if it's the bride and groom coming over or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, those you have to play if it's the bride and groom, and there's no negotiation involved. Everyone else, it's negotiable, but as long as it's danceable and can be fit in somewhere, I try to play 100% of the requests. And
that's fun.
Those are the people that have a comment at the end, right? Like they got the request, and and this, and then it creates this. That's how you get more gigs, right? Like a lot of people come and go, they don't ask you for anything, they don't leave, but they don't say anything. But a lot of people say, you were so great, I'm going to pass your name on to so-and-so, or, and so I might do some of that in Florida, but I'm probably not going to start any more companies or anything like that. This one does take up a lot of my time and mental energy, and being back out of the under the sphere of the private equity in a small business, and doing things and putting in new software systems and new marketing ideas and learning some of the new things that are out there and the tools. I'm geeked out on that stuff, and it's fun, but I won't need to do it a fourth time. And the one difference about this one as well is that I'm doing it by myself, right? So the buck kind of begins and ends here. This time. No co-founders. I don't have to divide the number by anything at the end, but I don't have anyone to cry with when times are tough. So, and
pros and cons.
And most people, most people can't really relate to the it's just like when your own kid's in trouble, like your teenager or whatever, like people can relate a little bit, but truly practice. I talk about empathy a lot in the book. They have struggle to practice empathy, right? They can practice sympathy, and
unless you've gone through that experience, you just don't have the empathy there. Yeah. Because you can't really feel what I'm feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire. And speaking of AI and geeking out, like, how do you see AI impacting your business and sales generally?
So for me, it's a productivity enhancement, not a replacement. I haven't been able to get any of the auto dialers or any of that, like appointment setters, to work. My customers are way too technical, and they get glitched out or whatever, but we use it to create a million campaign ideas that I have people in the Philippines making calls for me. I have inside sales that make follow-up calls, then outside sales, and they're constantly looking for ways in and looking for names and titles. And so I use an AI search like Seamless AI and Cognism and, those things to find the names and numbers and then find other ways and other departments I didn't think of, so it constantly it amplifies your creative thinking, right? And but it doesn't replace none of my sales stack's been replaced by any AI people. And right. I use it to analyze all sort of agreements, written or otherwise, right? Is there anything like large POs with 12 pages of terms? I can upload it now to AI and it can say, oh, there's a very strict liability clause in there you need to take a look at, or it's general boilerplate, whatever. It can come up with different ways of spinning your margin analysis model. So I use it for every department to figure out all the different ways I can attack things and how I should feel about things, right? Yeah. Most times I just drag emails in and I say, hey, how should I feel about this, right? It's like, well, that's a pretty thing. You should be pissed off or, or whatever, or this or that. Do you want it, I can give you like a cordial version. I can give you a stuffed version or a nasty version. What do you want? Right. And, you got to tweak it all and whatever. Right. And so, and a lot of things where it's super handy for me as well is like the finance department's not my number one specialty. Like I'm not a geeky finance guy and cash flow and this and that. And you can just dump all of your finance information in there and say, can you help me with the cash flow? Can you make any recommendations? And it analyzes things I would never even think of, and it brings out, warnings and stuff like that. So I use it to amplify my productivity in all departments. So, it's amazing. We use it for the graphics enhancements for the social media. We use it for the content. Right. It doesn't write the whole content because people can tell, but it gives us give me 30 ideas for the month. Right. And then we negotiate with it on how much it's going to write and how much we'll write. And, I could never think up 30 ideas in a reasonable amount of time, right?
Right. So, right. What's your take or sharpest take on why so many founders and companies with great products end up losing the market?
So I think, I guess I would probably say that it's, they become complacent, right? And complacency breeds contempt, and in both directions, right? If you're being complacent, people feel it and they become contemptuous of you, and vice versa. Getting in deep with their customers, right? Oh, we can do it all remotely, and we're moving from a direct model to a Zoom model, and we're shipping the demos in. And one of the rules at the front of the book is never ship the ship and never fax the fax, right? So, and that's a rule we practice to this day, what does that right? Mean? So let's say they want to see a demo, right? Unless it's geographically unavailable, we will deliver the demo. It's a company policy, right? We have to deliver it, set it up, plug it in, and make sure you know how to work it before we're going to leave it. Right. And then if they want a data sheet, we drop it off. We don't fax the facts. We hand deliver them because guess what? We can do it in the lobby. Now we got something in our hand, something in our mind. Right. So it's a way to get in front of the customer. And so you can figure out.
Yeah, I'll drop that off. Tuesday too, I'll drop that off for you. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to be in the area, right? Now you're going to be at that company. Then you phone everyone else at that company. You say, hey, I'm going to be in your building. Jack's dying to see that new product. Can I get 10 minutes with you while I'm in the building? Okay, sure. I'm a bit busy, but okay. And so then you're there, you get Jack to drop him off at Sally's desk. And then you ask Sally, say, Sally, I've been trying to see that engineering dude. Can you, can you walk me past him and introduce me so I can maybe get an appointment? Oh, no problem. I know him. I have lunch with him every day, blah, 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 whatever. Right. And then whatever they ask you for, you say, well, I'll bring it back next week when I'm back in the area.
Never lose an opportunity to make a human connection is another way of of phrasing that.
Yeah. And so people stop doing that. And they're like, oh, everything you do, you can do remotely. And not my stuff, because like I say, well, oh, okay, great. Well, you're so successful, you get a private jet. So can I take you on a virtual test flight of your jet and you're going to buy it? Or do you actually want to go for a flight? Right.
Right.
No, everything can't be sold virtually. Right. And so it doesn't matter if it's a $50 million jet or a 5K system or a 5K, whatever. Everything has to be handled appropriately. Right. Yeah. And never lose an opportunity to get in front of the customer.
I love that. So what should a founder measure to know whether their sales motion is healthy beyond revenue?
Well, revenue is one thing, but it's really, you want to be looking at the gross margin and the trend of the gross margin, right? It's really more about margin. I tend to look more, obviously I'm going to look at the, operating, the profits, the EBITDAs and those sort of things, but the gross margin and the trend of the gross margin is super important, right? Because everything, first you have your revenue and then you have your cost of goods sold, right? And then that becomes gross margin. And then all of your salary and rent and advertising and promotion, it all comes out of it. And you can variable and tweak all that. But you can't really, like, if you're lowering your price and lowering your margin, like you can't tweak it after the fact, right? It's immutable or whatever, and as they say. And so if your margins are slipping downwards, it's a really bad thing. Or in some cases, you find there's no margin and you're like, what the heck? Like, and people are not even paying attention because like the pricing is more obscure, the way the cost of goods is derived, and one end's not talking to the other. And it's like, you're selling it for 120 grand, but your cost is 130 grand or whatever. I mean, and so, and I've seen many times in talking to, friends and acquaintances and whatever with business, where they're not even aware of what their gross margin is, or they realize that it's 3% or something. I'm like, well, that's why you're broke.
Right.
Know? So I would watch the gross margin.
What's the best negotiation lesson you've learned from a deal you almost lost?
So, there's so many lessons. So it's like whatever pops in my brain at that moment, right? I'm not saying these things are the best, right? But like, and there's ones in the book like the tenacious takeaway, and I have names for all of them or whatever, right? I'm sorry, I've decided I can't sell it to you. And no, it's too much product for you. You can't have it, right? So it all really depends on the moment and what you're playing with, right? And so, because sometimes they want a better price, but you're never getting the deal because they're buying the competitor or those kind of things, right? So you don't want to be too attached to the outcome. I mean, and you have to be strong enough to do the difficult things. And one of my favorite sayings, it's in the book, is freedom begins with no. Right. And people are like, what's that mean? Freedom begins with no. And I'm like, well, your boss, you cook up a deal with the boss, you get this great price, great delivery, whatever, you present it, and, you're going in to get the deal. And the guy says, oh, I just need another 3%, and you're 40 minutes from the office and the boss thinks you're going to get the PO. And you're like, oh, well, maybe I can talk to my boss and see what I can do. But, it's going to be tough. And you go back to your boss, you're worrying the whole way back. You said, yes, right? Yes, I will try. Right? So your freedom is there's no freedom. It's pure terror. Your boss reams you out when you get back. We already gave the best price, you stupid, right? You say, well, sir, like, we had a long negotiation. And my understanding is you guys need this installed in 8 weeks. You know that our production cycle begins next week. We don't have the deal by Friday. We won't miss your start time. And I mean, we've already come forward with our best price. So I'm not going to be able to do anything on the price. And if you don't buy it now, you ain't getting it. One of the ways I explain it to people is the concept of, and I grew up in Canada, and we used to have this thing where, someone would say to you, oh, do you want to go to the movies tonight? And I'd say no. And they're like, well, why not? I would say, well, I can't afford it. And in Canada, that means no, I ain't never going to get the money. No one's giving me the money. I'm never going to have the money. Shut up and stop asking, right? Like, it's just a thing in Canada when you say I can't afford it, there's no more discussion. Right? Like, it is what it is, right? So it's like saying, no, I can't afford it. You're now free. You're not going to the movies. They're not going to ask you. They're going to go to the movies. They're not going to like hate you for it or whatever, right? Freedom begins when you say no. Everything else requires you to do a bunch of work, right? So when you're negotiating, just say no.
My mom and my grandma are Canadian, and I'm listening to them now say we can't afford it in my head, like so many times as a child, And now I know culturally that meant like, no, this is end of conversation.
Exactly.
But like for a child like me, growing up I grew up in Seattle, I was like, that's the opening point of negotiation.
Right.
Yeah.
No, not in Canada. Yeah.
That's so funny.
But I just use it kind of as an example, right? And
what's a belief about selling that you held pretty strongly and then you reversed over time? Or recently?
Well, I used to think, that working harder would fix the problem. More hours, more pressure, more control, and I kind of thought that was more
cold calls, more everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it sort of boils down to more like clarity, right? And sometimes rest beats panic, right? Like taking a breath, thinking about it, formulating, and also I have sayings like trust beats control. And most problems solve themselves by doing nothing and just waiting, right? Like, there's actually a saying, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but, like 99% of all problems that you worry about never occur, right?
Yeah, your inbox will be full when you die is a phrase that I've heard. And then,
So,
I mean, you wait long enough. I mean, you'll have the heat death of the solar system, right? The sun's going to, just wait long enough. And this will happen on vacation a lot. Like you'll come back from a week or 2 week vacation And you'll see this problem flare up while you're gone,
Right,
and get solved
yeah,
without you.
right,
Because
right,
you just were away from your email. You just didn't check, right? You have your
yeah,
vacation responder on, and
yeah.
so sometimes
So you want to perpetually procrastinate on those things, right?
Yeah.
Until they solve themselves, right? And I mean, if somebody asks you 3 times for something, you have to pay attention, but a lot of times they never come back after the first request, right? And so, but if someone, like a customer says, my screen's broken once, or, I mean, if it's that, I'd fix it right away, but that's not a good example. But sometimes things come and then they never come back. They were looking for a freebie or some other kind of issue or whatever, and they just solve themselves. But if they ask for it 3 times, there's probably something you need to pay attention to, right? So,
all right, last question. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, in business, it was that I'm very passionate about being a pleasure to do business with, right? And I built my last company on that with the DNA from the ground up, right? And I can give you some examples if you need them, what that means, right? But also, so now I came into a 20-year-old company that I'm not saying that they weren't a pleasure to do business with, but now I'm trying to like recreate it in a 20-year-old business. And I feel myself getting there and having an impact on it. And I just want my legacy to be that with most people, I left them better than when I found them, and that's pretty much it.
Love it. Well, Glenn, I learned a lot. Thanks for sharing all your stories and wisdom with us. The book is Never Sit in the Lobby. Please go check it out. I know I will. I learned a ton. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.